No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, I want to talk about remote work, but in a different way than what we've talked about in the past. We've gotten a lot of questions about how to lead in remote work environments, and we've had conversations about this before. We've had episodes about this before, but we seem to be kind of moving into this place where a lot of kind of new normals are kind of occurring. Less organizations are kind of figuring out what they want to do, and more have figured out what they want to do from a remote versus hybrid versus on-site environment. There is still some movement happening out there, but a lot of organizations have kind of settled on what they're doing. And in general, about 2.5 times as many people as before COVID are now working in remote environments today. And the reason why I think this is important is because I think there are a lot of people out there, a lot of leaders out there who still struggle with this, almost like they thought, well, this is temporary. I don't need to change my leadership style. We're going to go back to the office eventually. And now we're kind of in this place where, well, no, this is kind of the way it is now for a lot of people. I'm leading a remote team, and I'm really having a tough time creating a good culture, team cohesion. I feel like I'm kind of holding people accountable individually, but barely, and everybody wants different needs or different expectations of me as a leader. So I think this is an important thing to discuss.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I even have, friends and people that I've worked with a long time ago that have actually taken jobs in kind of the remote leadership workspace. So even outside of maybe having it been adjusted or, all of us pretty much that I know got experience in the remote, virtual workspace, not necessarily by choice to a degree, but it was good experience to get. But I think people have chosen that now as kind of a career path. And yes, we continue to get questions, and there's a lot of dialogue around this because I think in spaces and with organizations that maybe have always done it that way, those companies have built in really clear structures, really clear strategies. This is how things are done. And like with most jobs, most workplaces, like you kind of accept what that is when you get there. But I think over the last couple of years now, you've got companies that have either decided to do it this way or have been forced to do it this way or are looking to kind of diversify how and where they have workforces. And so now you got a lot of leaders that are saying, well, I enjoy this. It works for me, but I also want to be able to figure out different ways to build connection and to engage people. And especially if you come from maybe workplaces that traditionally were not remote, and you're like, I want to bring some of that feeling or some of that culture to the current role that I'm in. I think that there's a lot of dialogue that needs to be had here, and there's a lot of questions that I know that I've just been answering or discussing with people on a personal level. So I think it's good that we're talking about it on the show.
Right. I remember working in human resources for Best Buy a long time ago when the company moved to the results-oriented work environment or ROW program, which essentially allowed teams to work remotely. And this would have been back in like 2007, 8, 9. So even that long ago, teams were trying to look at the benefits of allowing people to have more flexibility in terms of getting the right work-life balance. And ultimately, where that program succeeded versus failed was based completely on the leadership of the individual teams. And some teams really thrived under that program, and some teams really did not thrive under that program. And really what it came down to is, what were the expectations set by the leaders, and what was the culture of the team that said, how do we make this work with us versus how is it wielded as a weapon against the leadership who is trying to make me come to the office or whatever it is. And so I think this is important because I saw an article even on the leadership section of Forbes written by Stacey Hunke, who's an author and a keynote speaker, and she's talking about ways to grow influence with remote employees. And I think this is a different take on it because growing influence is different than just saying, how do you lead a remote in a remote environment? We've had talks about this where it's like, oh, this is what you put in place from a process standpoint. but growing influence as a leader is incredibly important, or maintaining influence. And it's very different when you are in a remote environment or leading remotely than leading in an office. And a lot of these things that she talks about in this article are things that I think a lot of leaders, they're almost afraid of. They're really hesitant to try to put in place, because if the job inherently is remote, it may come with an implication that these things aren't allowed, or that we can't put these types of schedulings in place. But if you are tasked with having any type of team cohesion or any type of culture that says we're working together, these things are necessary. Where is it not necessary? You have a whole bunch of outside sales representatives who don't have to work together at all. Great. Maybe these things aren't necessary. But in a lot of organizations, remote work doesn't mean individual work only. You still have to accomplish goals as a team. And so I want to go through some of these things that she mentions in the article, because I think they're incredibly important if we are expecting our teams to still collaborate and work together and accomplish goals together. I'll list them off, all four of them, and we can kind of talk about them. She says that we need to create team routines. We need to provide options. We need to be responsive and expect responsiveness, and we need to personally connect and offer encouragement. So, what are your thoughts about this? Because I'm trying to figure out, if I'm a leader and I'm listening to this, I'm hearing, create a routine. Well, wait a minute. If my people are working remote, what if they say, no, that routine doesn't work for me?
Yeah, no, I think that there's some assumptions made in this article,
right?
And that, to your point, like the one of the big assumptions is that everybody's remote, but everybody's working at the same time, right? So that could be one of the things. But I like the idea of the creating team routines around, like, what's going to be happening today. Like, can we gather as a team to talk about the work today? And what are we doing? What are the priorities? What are we looking to accomplish? Or maybe that's this week. So, like, again, let's say that time, like, there is a day where everybody is working remote at the same time. We can bring everybody together. But I really think the essence of that first one is being able to talk about that. As a team, what are we collectively looking to accomplish? What's everybody working on? What's a quick update? What are we goal setting, or what are the deadlines for these items, and then when are the next maybe milestone or checkpoints that we're going to have? I think that's important, and then that way people know that they know what they need to have showing up to these meetings. They know kind of what everybody is working on. They can hear about things that maybe overlap. There's going to be stuff like that I think is really important, so that people can then build their time and their calendar around these types of moments. Again, I think that when we talk about remote work, I think we tend to picture this idea of you have work to do, and so do it around what else you have going on in life. We don't think about remote work as I have headphones plugged in, I'm in front of a computer from 9 to 5, and I'm basically either taking phone calls or I'm chatting, like I'm live with a customer. Like we think remote work, we don't think remote customer service, but that's a big chunk of remote work.
Right.
So I just think that's, those are things that I think have to be discussed and looked at. And again, if you're in spaces like remote customer service, a lot of times those routines are automatically built up by the organization. They're required. Yes, you're working remotely, but you are also working a full day, and every minute of every day is being tracked and clocked and looked at for productivity.
Sure.
Versus the remote work where you have more flexibility. You're working as a team, you have the same deadlines, but you have different workflows and times that you get the work done. But I do think it's important from an alignment standpoint that you really start there. You have some type of a routine.
Right. If you're working in like a call center or something that is remote, but you have to log into like a Workday type of app, or where everything is tracked and productivity is tracked, this becomes a moot point. I mean, it's kind of it's dictated for you. Where this can be an issue is when people interpret remote work as I work on my time, on my schedule. And so let's say that everybody worked at an office in New York City from 2017 to 2020, and all of a sudden, COVID hit, everybody goes remote, and at some point in time, some of the team moves from New York to Oregon, And now all of a sudden it's like, well, I know you start at 9 a.m., but I'm still asleep at 6 a.m. in Oregon, and I don't really start till like 10 after I finish, breakfast with my kids. Well, by 10 o'clock, it's 1 o'clock in New York, and you're maybe, having lunch with a team and not available till 2 o'clock when you come back. And, and that's when I'm actually getting my work done. How can you expect teams to work together when one half of the team basically is not available during the workday of the other half of the team and vice versa? And this is when it becomes a leadership role to kind of set the expectation of when, like, if you want to move, if you want to be in a different, location or time zone or whatever it is, that's fine. If that works with the business, that's fine. Here are the expectations of availability. Here are the expectations of when the work is supposed to happen. Now, are there exceptions to that? Can you say, hey, I have a soccer game to go to with one of my kids for the day and I would like to be able to go do that? Sure. But it's not an assumption that is the norm and that work has to almost pencil itself into your schedule. If you have a job and it's remote, that's still the job, and the job still has whatever those core hours are, and you would still need to find ways of making sure that as a leader, that is the level of accountability, that you can work with your people to be able to get done the right level of work-life balance and get the things done in their personal life. But having that time set aside that the team gets together, whether it's the first 30 minutes of the day, as Stacy says here in the article, or whether it's 3 hours once a week, or whatever works is fine. But having time where you're all together to level set, I think, is incredibly important. And it's going to be really hard to maintain that cohesion if you don't have that. The second thing that she says is talking about, providing options to people. And I think that's important. Some people want to be on a Zoom call. Some people want to be able to, take it from the sitting on the beach or being able to use Slack. This idea of there is this one place where we all get together and meet. It doesn't necessarily work for all people. So having a lot of different avenues, Microsoft Teams, Slack, Zoom, Skype, all these different ways people can connect with each other, especially if you're talking about one-on-one, where they can work together to figure out what works best for them. I think that's a really big benefit, as opposed to saying this is what you have to use to interface.
Yeah, and I also think it's important as a leader to kind of establish, like, what are those platforms and what are those platforms used for?
Right.
I've been on plenty of virtual WebEx calls or Skype calls or whatever, and it's like we're talking with cameras off. This might as well be a phone call.
Right.
Why do I have to be in front of a computer, or why do I have to log into the app? And of course, maybe there's security reasons, but at the end of the day, I think it's, as a leadership, like, being very clear around, hey, here's kind of the things. When we have these types of meetings, these will be in front of a computer, camera on, with the team, to talk through, to ideate, to discuss things like that. This level of work would happen in a virtual thing, like whether it's Slack or Teams or whatever, however you want to communicate. But that's what this is for us to have an ongoing element where everybody's, like, you may be communicating with one person, but it's part of a larger team. So we all need visibility to what's going on, or what questions are being asked, or what threads you want to use. And then there's the text message element of it, which is like, this is we need an answer, or we need some urgency within the next 15 minutes, so of the work day. Because again, to your point, like, it's okay of how and where and you do your work from a remote standpoint, but if you get a communication in one of these different platforms, this is the intent of it, this is what's needed, this is what's necessary, and this is kind of what's expected. I think those are all things that are super helpful, because then I think it avoids confusion and frustration of people using different platforms for the wrong reasons or the least efficient reason. But it also allows people to know, like, yeah, between this time and this time, I need to be in a space where I potentially could be on camera if these meetings pop up, versus this time to this time, I can be where I need to be, or doing things I need to do, or wearing my pajamas or whatever. But I'm still getting work done, So I think that, I think having the options in a remote thing makes it very, very helpful. Again, when you're talking about collaborating across larger teams, but also individuals within those teams.
Yeah, that brings us into the third one, which kind of ties the first two in together, which is being responsive and expecting responsiveness. And I think this kind of ties those first two in, because it's like, if I'm trying to get my work done and I'm working 9 to 5 and I'm sending a message to somebody and they've decided that they're working from 2 p.m. to midnight because they had something going on that day, and now all of a sudden I can't move forward because I don't have an answer from them till the following day, that can be problematic. And I think it's important to set something in place that says, there is an expectation of responsiveness, and it's between this time, and you can expect that from me as well as a leader.
There should definitely be an expectation for both the leader and the employee around, we're in this space, but if you need something, you've got me. And if I need something during the workday, I absolutely should be able to get a hold of you and have you be responsive to the work, regardless of where you're at or what's going on, which I think rolls into the fourth part of this, which is around the personal connection and really offering encouragement. And I think that's such an important part of taking the time. One of the benefits of the remote one of the benefits of the remote workspace is that you let people, I think, prioritize their personal life a little bit more because they're not having to travel so often to an office or to a place of work. They're able to be more comfortable in the space that they have, but that also means that you have to be more intentional with the nuance and the what would be the water cooler conversations, or let's go grab lunch together, the informal connections. I think in the virtual space and in the remote space, you have to be way more intentional around that personal piece and making sure that you're really close to the work, and that if there is this flexibility in how and where people get work done, and you don't have this rigid milestones of productivity minute by minute, hour by hour, you got to find spaces to recognize people for the work and to pause in their day and make sure they feel valued.
Right. And the first line of this part of the article really says it best, is that remote workers often feel isolated. And I've worked with this before. I've seen this over the course of the pandemic, where you don't really catch on to the subtle signs that a person is not feeling connected to the business, feeling isolated, feeling like things are kind of spiraling out of control, because you don't see the look in their eyes every day as they're walking by you in the hallway. You don't get the subtle differences that we see in tone and in facial expression, because you're not interacting with them every single day face to face, and all you see is the work being submitted and done. By the time you realize there is a problem, the problem might have been there for months already. And so taking time to personally connect with people with a camera on or in person somewhere that lets you still kind of keep your thumb on the pulse of what's going on with each of your people individually, to make sure that you're addressing these things early as opposed to waiting until they spiral out of control, I think is incredibly important to do.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us this episode's 1 minute hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
The 1 minute hack.
All right, for this episode's 1 minute hack, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to link to this article in the podcast description. I want you to take a look at this and make sure that you are writing down the things that you're doing in spirit of each of these four things. You want to make sure that the conversations are happening individually with your people. You want to make sure that there's at least some semblance of a routine, even if it's just one type of team connection per day or per week, whatever it is that you've agreed upon together, that works, and that you feel that it's working as the leader. Because if it's not working, then something needs to change on that. That you're providing options for your people in terms of ways that they connect, and that you are as responsive as you can be during the time of day that you have said that you're going to be responsive, and that you're clear on what that time is, that your expectation from your people is of that as well. Make sure that you can speak to each of these four things as far as what you do in the remote teams that you're leading, because if you can't put down something from each of these, or if what you're putting down is that you're writing it down, you're thinking, I can write this down, but it's lacking. It's not really fitting the bill or solving the issues that we're having. Then it's time to go back and look at each of these things and figure out how can this change? How can you meet with your people to find ways of making these things work? Because if you're feeling this as the leader, they are definitely feeling this as individual employees too. Don't just assume that they want things to continue the way they are and that you have to bear the burden of this. Find out ways of how to make these things work, because you will have better team cohesion, you'll have better productivity, and you'll have people who get their who are happier at work, even if it means that they have more of a routine and less of that flexibility.
Yeah, no, I'm glad. It was a great 1 minute hack, and I'm glad that we've had the conversation. I think that we'll probably end up having more episodes kind of dedicated to the idea of remote work as we have more and more leaders that kind of fold into that space. So I appreciate it. I think it's a great article. And of course, as usual, we'll have a link to the article in the podcast notes. So please check it out and continue to send in any of your thoughts, your questions, or even the scenarios that you're working through right now. We'd love to be able to provide any perspective at all that we can to help in this journey.
Yeah. Leading remotely, it can be very difficult if you're very used to leading in person. But putting these things in place can it can lessen that burden on you, and it can make it so it doesn't feel like you're just like, waiting for the next shoe to drop as far as a fire you have to put out. You can lead in this way and still have the cohesion that you had when you were all in person together, as long as you do take these steps.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.